Hi, everyone. I just really want to start by thanking Celine and Colin for inviting me here today. It's just been an incredible afternoon. My mind has been blown in so many different ways. And for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be talking about something that I'm really passionate about, which is circular design. And I just wanted to start off by introducing some of the really incredible women I work with and whose work and ideas and efforts I'll be sharing along with my own during this next 10 minutes. So Becky Early and Kay Politovits are also academics based here at the University of the Arts London. And we work together on full-time research projects, which feels like a very privileged position to have. And in 2017, Becky and I co-founded the Centre for Circular Design to sort of put our efforts 100% into this area, which we've been working on. But actually, I think the history of the work goes back much further, and I've actually been working with them for almost 20 years now. And Kay originally started a project called Textile Environment Design, which many of you might know, which has gradually over the years become the Centre for Circular Design. And I love this picture because also around the table we have the brilliant Ellen Larson, who was Head of Sustainability at Philippa K, who we worked with for a number of years, and her Frontrunners team. And also Sandra Roos, who is a Swedish scientist, an environmental scientist we've been working really closely with for the last 8 years, who is probably one of the most open-minded experts in her field I've ever met. So, circular design. I'm going to try and cover 3 things very briefly, and in doing so, show some examples of the ways we've been working. I appreciate that circular design isn't the whole of sustainability. It's not everyone's kind of focus in terms of their priorities, but I think it offers something really hopeful at this stage in time, and I'd like to sort of share why. So what it is, what it's not, why I think it's really important now, and what can we actually do about it as designers. So what is it? I mean, at the simplest level, when we're teaching and talking to students here, I talk about it as just looking at the products and the objects we design as systems. They're not static sort of beings. They come with an enormous history and probably have traveled an awfully long way, and every decision we make in that design process is affecting people in the system, people who are using the products and the garments, and also ultimately, more and more we're thinking about what imprint it leaves on the planet and its resources in the future. Some really interesting work going on in the last few years looking at sort of geology, future geology. So to me that's, the basic or the baseline of this is just to think about everything as dynamic and connected and moving. And of course, I mean, it feels a little bit like we've shifted into a session that's mainly focused on materials, but of course it's not. It's materials and people. And the thing I love about circular design is it sort of seems to be something that connects people in a very powerful way, because if we're all working towards the same ultimate system, and we collaborate with the people that intervene in that system, we can really make some very powerful change at fast pace. So I still think this is one of the best ways of trying to explain that. The Great Recovery project that looked at many, many different ways of designing within the circular economy and who you might need to connect with in order to do that. But of course, it's complicated. I think we've had sort of several comments today about whether it's simple or complicated. The more I think about it, the more complex, actually. It's not complicated, it's complex it becomes. But as researchers, we're very lucky to just be able to keep asking questions and hopefully some of the difficult questions. And one of the things we've been concerned with for a long time is this idea of, I suppose, nature as the ultimate cycle and the ultimate system to follow. And nature isn't tidy or mono anything, really. Nature is diverse and connected. It comes in all scales. It comes at all speeds. There is no waste. And I think if we can use that as a pattern to follow, then we can, have some real innovation. an expression that actually my colleague Kay found some time ago when we were doing a project about fast fashion, which I'll talk a bit more about, is a Japanese expression, mono no owari, and it's about the appreciation of short-lived product lifespans as part of the long and short cycles in nature. So we're just looking for something that perhaps gave an idea of a positivity in this idea of obsolescence or a fleeting moment. So we've been looking actually at this question for the last 4 years, and it's provided a really rich research topic. And of course, when we started looking at fast and slow, our idea was we wanted to look at the outer edges of these speeds of cycles, because we realized that, you know, in our lives, I don't think any of us can say we only do something slowly. We only have slow garments in our wardrobe. We all have things that are on a spectrum, and we wanted to really be inclusive in that perspective. It was really easy to find, and it still is incredibly important to look at slowing down, buying less. You know, the figures are just, you can't argue with them. And also it feels right. But fast fashion, I think, has just become a kind of a shortcut to talking about a certain type of fast fashion. And we just started with the question, you know, is fast in and of itself a problem, or is it the way we're doing it? And if so, why, and how can we change it? And I think, you know, something that we felt quite strongly, and again, it's been discussed in several of the forum this morning, access to material resources is essential to the needs of an increasing world population and to the future of production. So any circularity model for materials or economies must put the well-being of all the people at its core. That should include access to goods and services for the least advantaged. And the range of creative material engagements for the rest must also include appreciation of the speeds of material flow and flexibility to withstand change. So trying to sort of really understand those perspectives in terms of fashion. Why now? So I think it's about urgency, agency, and hopefully I can bring some optimism. I think, you know, I don't need to speak to the people in this room about the urgency of the situation. Research that on the planetary boundaries has been sort of quite mind-blowing, really, in terms of, you know, we're already overshooting 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries. And all the detail for that can be found at the Stockholm Resilience Centre website. But also there's some optimism, I think, in ways of thinking about the systems we're working in, and, you know, brilliant economists like Kate Raworth looking at something much more positive as a solution to this. You know, economics no longer dedicated solely to growth. Economics allowing us to thrive whether or not they grow. I mean, that's a real challenge for us and industry, I think. And sharing wealth, knowledge and power. You know, wouldn't it be incredible if we could really sort of pertain to that ambition? Activism. I think we're living in an unbelievable time at the moment. I kind of go through cycles of kind of total despair watching the telly, and then hope that there is so much action out there. And I know most people in this room have been involved in this activity over recent weeks. And I think it's an incredible opportunity, because all of a sudden there's a swell, a groundswell of action. I think where I struggle a little bit is to know exactly what action we need to take. And it's very easy to find the next question, but often quite difficult to come to a finite conclusion. But for the optimism, I think there is another revolution going on, and I would like to talk a little bit about that. And that's a really interesting material point in time. If you look right back to over 5,000 years ago, and right up until about 100 years ago, there were only really 4 fibers that we can see historically in use. You know, cotton, wool, silk, and linen. And all the fibers that we know today have really come about in this sort of very short time frame, in well under 100 years. And so the incredible innovation that's happened, and obviously coincided with the discovery of oil, has really sort of created a very, very complicated material background. And fashion and textiles, you know, is possibly one of the most complex of all product materials, I think. And actually, even today, you know, I was lucky enough to be at the Global Change Awards a few weeks ago, and even today, there are so many incredible material innovations, particularly making new textile fibers from food waste streams. But actually, all of those materials are still kind of represented on this list. They come from a different, more raw material resource, but they fundamentally are types of synthetic or semi-synthetic fiber on the whole. But I think we're in an incredibly interesting time right now in terms of, I see the next 50 years as being a revolution in undoing materials. I think the kind of technology breakthroughs we're seeing now are all around being able to unbuild the building blocks that we've built up over the last 50 years. And I'd just like to read a short text about sort of the optimism I feel in this discovery. As our technological recovery routes and systems improve and increase, the potential of a future materials ecology, not economy, ecology, becomes more tangible. The very building blocks of matter can be taken apart and reconstructed as new materials through chemical recycling. Virgin materials taken from our ever-dwindling supply can be replaced with those already in circulation or with renewable and recoverable inputs. While still far from a regular part of manufacture, these innovations are ever closer to reality. Longevity of materials can lie in their molecular rebirth and not only their ability to age gracefully as products, ever transforming and mutating into the next reincarnation to feed endlessly back into the system. Closed loops, open loops, connected loops. What does it mean to design for this state of constant undoing and becoming of matter? How can we uncover and learn the new rules of material chemistry and embed them into our future design briefs? Now, I know that's not perhaps a traditional sustainability perspective on materials, but I do think that we need a really dynamic and diverse set of approaches to be able to deal with the sort of enormity of what we're trying to do. And this is just one last word really on the material side of things. Thinking about fast and slow has been a very interesting way to go, because one of the first things we had to think about was what it meant from a materials perspective. Most of the time, we're thinking about fast production, how fast something goes to market, or fast sort of obsolescence, you know, how quickly someone stops wearing it. But what about the materials themselves? We treat polyester as if it's a kind of a really fast, low value fiber, but actually it's probably the fiber that's taken the longest to form, if you think about oil as a raw material. And some of the kind of more recent vegetable-based fibers are quite renewable and fast to produce. So it completely turns the idea of cotton as a slow material and polyester as a fast one on its head. And also the kind of technologies that we've been looking at really mess with this system as well. So, you know, synthetics can become fast through recycling processes. You take a synthetic material and recycle it in a very sort of effective way back into use. That's a very sort of quick and can be economic process. And even bionutrients. I mean, there are some really interesting kind of chemistry innovations right now that can take a plastic and turn it back into a bionutrient. Seems completely incredible, but if you think about oil in its original state as being rotted down vegetation, then you see that there is nothing on this planet that is synthetic. It's all about what we do to it. And I think that's where I suppose my work in particular has been focused in recent years. You know, as a designer, how can I really understand the materials landscape I'm working within so that I can avoid unintended consequences and sort of falling into a trap of perhaps some generalizations. So designers, just to sort of round up, what can we do? Collaborate like never before. It's, you know, the people in this room are already converted. We're already talking on the same page. You know, I think if we're going to really make progress, we have to talk to people who disagree with us. We have to talk to people in the supply chain or value chain that we don't normally encounter. Becky and I have been working for the last 4 years on a big project called Trash to Cash, which is the most wonderful sort of European collaborative project, which I very much hope won't be ending. And it was looking at the recycling of cotton into cellulose and also polyester. So we worked directly with the scientists who were doing that. They were even turning brown cardboard into a cellulose textile. And in working closely with them, in building these kind of multi and interdisciplinary design teams that included retailers, commercial designers, material sources, and scientists, and environmental scientists too, we were able to understand a little bit of each other's decision-making process and come up with some really exciting and sort of connected product ideas, and they're all available on the Trash to Cash website. Question everything. As I said, I think there are some real misconceptions with materials. This might be a controversial thing to say, but bamboo. I mean, bamboo is often a viscose. It's not always the kind of the purely environmental fiber that people are led to believe. It could be, bamboo can be made of plastic, it can be turned into a viscose, and very rarely it can be a kind of a linen-like fiber. So I think we've got to be very careful of shortcuts, of sort of information that's simplified. We need simple information, but in that process, we have to find the sweet spot between simplification and really understanding the difference between a raw material and the process it goes through in order for us to use it. Another interesting one, I think, is polyester. You know, polyester, of course, can be made from oil and plastic, but it also can be made from corn, and which is industrially biocompostable, and it also can be made from milk. But, you know, you take that same milk, you can make cheese. So it's kind of, it was a bit of a fun project initially to try and express the material world in a way that I felt designers might feel more connected to. It was a series of animations and kind of set up as a game called Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. So all the materials are classified in that very simple way, but lead you on a journey to their origins. Become systems thinkers. This is, I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, but I think with the collaboration and asking questions, it leads you very quickly to this way of working. So Becky's been working alongside our fast work for the last 8 years in Mistra Future Fashion on a project called Super Slow. So we were designing the fastest possible and the slowest possible garments we could imagine. And so Becky's work has always been centered around this idea of upcycling and being able to recover and redesign products in a brilliant way to extend their life. And she managed to design a system that could last for 50 years. But to do that, you know, probably the easy stage was the design process. You know, what would the product do every time it was redeveloped? But in doing that, she had to work with different designers from different parts of the cycle. So she worked with 2 other designers who were responsible for transformations in the later life of the product. And together they designed something right from the start that could be easily transferred. So I think there's something super interesting about designing a product's sort of reincarnation right at the beginning. And she also had to work with a lot of social science partners, you know, Copenhagen Business School, and we also had a full-time postdoc looking at something called stakeholder mapping to really understand. Of course, this is something very difficult to design in at the beginning, but if you bring in expertise on peer-to-peer sharing, new business models, consumer behavior, different behaviors in different global locations, all of a sudden you get some really interesting insights. Again, I'm summarizing a lot of work in a very short period of time. At the fast end, we really just wanted to look not, I mean, the word fast is very contentious, I know, but we wanted to look at what about the products that, no matter how well they're designed, how durable the material, are fashion pieces and not lasting as long as they could be. And we wanted to design something light and that could be part of a nutrient biological cycle. So we worked with the science department in Stockholm, and they have the most incredible paper and cellulose research going on there. So we wanted to use an established paper-making production, which produces very, very large volumes of a very sort of single material, but we wanted to make a paper textile that was wearable. And one of the hardest things was just communicating to them what sort of it needed to be and what it needed to do. We took laundry out of the equation. This isn't something that's designed to launder, but it is something that's designed to be recycled as newspaper. So we had very strict kind of guidelines from the outset. We used natural dyeing, only bio-based materials, and new sort of developments in cellulose glue for a replacement to stitch, so that every single component sort of obeyed the rules of the recovery context. And in doing so, we learned an awful lot about the potential for technology in this area. So although the base material was just one type of material that actually came off a little bit like brown paper, it wasn't perfect when it came off the roll, but as designers we could use various new techniques to completely transform the material into hundreds of different functions and aesthetics, whether it was waterproofing with natural bio-coatings or sort of layering and quilting, transparency. We even got stretch into the material with a micro pleating process that gave it comfort. So there's a place for technology, I think, even in some of these more unusual areas. But at the same time, not forgetting historical context. I'm in a really interesting conversation at the V&A a couple of days ago, and they had one of their historians there, and it was so interesting how so many of the things that we think are new today actually have their roots hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years ago. And we got a lot out of looking at the history of paper, for example, and actually found that in the very place we were working in Sweden, there was a history of making paper garments for children after the Second World War. And the factory still exists and makes paper today. And lastly, I suppose it's part of the same thing. Find new tools, find new ways of working. I think as designers, it's so interesting to put yourself sort of somewhere maybe uncomfortable or in a space that you're not used to working in. This is one of our PhD students who's been working in the lab on a chemical recovery of cellulose, so recycling of a bio-based material, and she's actually developing innovative materials based on that process, seeing the recycled material as a new raw material, and hopefully sort of avoiding the need for new materials in the future. Because of course we're just as short on land to grow natural fibres as we are of oil to make synthetics. And finally, I think it's really important to make it. And I think I'm really excited about the panel that's coming up, because it's until we try things out in industry, they're not real, and we don't always have the whole picture. And I think we need it to become more than a theory so that we can fail fast and move on. And for me, making is about making to think, making to communicate, making to test, and making to refine. And I think we need to be transforming and communicating with materials all the way through the process. And I'll just leave you with one last, if I can move on. This is an illustration that we kind of often use to represent how we feel sometimes in this highly complex area. But I'd just like to read you a short extract from a piece I wrote for Viewpoint magazine called Afterlife, Designing the End in the Beginning. As efforts intensify to move us from our linear models of making and consumption towards more circular, connected, and progressive ones, our relationship with the materials we surround ourselves with will change. How we view and design products, not as static objects, but as dynamic and evolving systems, is key to this more sustainable future. Respect and care for the materials themselves, coupled with an appreciation of their inherent value, leads us to create new narratives and perspectives. Can we design not only for the new product that is destined to disappoint once its shiny shell has faded and worn, but for all the stages of its life journey, birth, growth, death, decay, ultimately guiding it to rebirth once more? Design has the power to harness these multiple approaches and find ever more creative ways to retell the story of materials and prepare them for their very own afterlife. Thank you.